So here again, some disconnect. Often, you know, you'll be able to, I can go in and I can talk about SARS and I can talk about blackouts, and I get some, you know, the politicians will understand that. But if I start to talk about things that are going to happen but haven't yet happened, you know, I live in Brampton, and just south of us we've got Mississauga. And everybody, when we talk about train derailment, everybody remembers the great train derailment, 1978, I think, something like that. And they all remember that. But we've got a railroad right in Brampton that crosses this, you know, splits the city in two, and we got 60 freight trains a day. But if I talk about train derailment, I say, oh, that was Mississauga. No. So then I kind of talk to them about extreme rain events and snow, and difficult to do without the data. And then we go into bureaucrats, and I'm one of them. But one of the problems also with bureaucrats, and it gets worse, and I don't want to insult anybody, but it gets worse as you get up the levels. You know, I know we've got a few federal representatives here, but I find it's more difficult because as you go up, you need there's more bureaucracy that exists. There's more. You need to be accountable for more things, and there's more discussion that needs to be done. So it makes it more difficult, and the disconnect is worse as you get up the level. I mean, as a municipal manager, I'm closer to the citizens than my counterparts were at the federal level. But the other thing also with this is that there's a lot of committees that are being struck which go on and on and on and don't actually produce anything. And I hope nobody gets insulted, but I worked on a committee. I was invited to participate on a committee on a national public alerting system. And that committee was put together by Industry Canada. And initially they invited people from various organizations to participate. And I was very happy with it because I know we need some public alerting. We need to have that. We need a national system. And participate. And we worked on it for about 5 years. And when the project was just about finished, it went to, we recognized that it had to be approved by the CRTC, which is the national agency that oversees everything to do with communication. So the project was sent to the CRTC, and the CRTC looked at it and said, we can't do that. And he said, why? I said, well, because it's a conflict of interest. Because the CRTC reports to Industry Canada, and Industry Canada can't get a project approved by one of its subsidiaries. So they said, we can't approve it. And since there's no other agencies in Canada that can approve this kind of project, the whole project went by the wayside, and that's it. The 5 years of work just disappeared. Luckily, a few people that were on the committee that were not in the federal government took a lot of the work that was done, and I'm happy to report that we're revamping, and there's a private, semi-private committee, a non-profit organization that has been put together to try to revive at least some of the leftovers from that, the work that was done there, so that we don't have a total loss. But unfortunately, very often that's what happens. I'm afraid a lot of it. The other thing that happens is that a lot of things that happen at some levels of government aren't consultative. So they're just one level decides or makes a decision, discusses things amongst a very private group, and comes up with decisions. And I'll give you one example of something that happened. A friend of mine, and I won't name him, and used to be, he's retired now, he used to be a provincial coordinator for a ministry. And one day, on a Friday afternoon, he gets, or Thursday afternoon, he gets a call from his minister or some assistant to his minister, and saying, how much would it cost to hire 100 cops for the province? He was responsible for public safety, and how much would it cost for 100 cops? And so, calls his aides, and that's quickly comes up with a figure. Is it 100 cops? That's what it would cost for the province. The next morning, the minister goes into the caucus and comes out of the caucus and makes a press announcement saying that the province is now going to hire 1,000 cops. Basically, he took the 100, multiplied by 10, and that's it. We've got 1,000. Well, the first thing that happened is that, of course, the phone started ringing off the hook in my friend's office from all the police chiefs in the province saying, how do I get my share of those cops, I need them, you know, how do I get them? Of course, there's no programs, there's nothing, it's just a figure put together, that's all it is. So there's nothing absolutely, but the minister's already made the announcement. So I said, well, we're working on it, we'll have the details to you by Monday. And he calls and he says, oh, everybody, we're staying in for the weekend, we're calling in for pizza, and that's how a whole program was developed over a weekend. So that the Monday morning, all the police chief in the province had, you know, the methodology to be able to access those.
Why are you focusing on such a good example?
Well, that's why my friend retired also. You know, I don't want any more of this. But those are some of the problems that, you know, another element of disconnect. You put into the mix after that some interest groups. And these interest groups, although well-meaning very often, have a very limited focus. They see one little element. They see, you know, the tip of the iceberg, and they don't see the whole structure that's behind it. So they'll push and they'll push and they'll put pressure. You know, and they'll say, that's the problem we've got to solve. And until that's solved, you know, you government are useless and you're not doing anything. I had one group in Brampton. We had actually at one point we had a company that we discovered was actually recycling radioactive material, and they were receiving radioactive material from all over the place, and some kind of process where they were put it in ingots, and the ingots would go back and be reused for nuclear activity. You know, I'm not sure exactly what they were doing. The fact was that suddenly they wanted to expand the company. They wanted to grow. They were getting more and more business, and so they applied for a permit to expand. And we said, well, it's not the city that needs to do that. You need to go to the National Atomic Agency. I forget the name now. You need to get their approval. And they came back and said, well, to do that, to get an expansion, you need to have a public, an open house. You need to let the public know. So had a public forum, opened it up, and the public came in, and of course the public that did come in were all the interest groups suddenly finding out that, hey, what? We've got radioactive material in our backyard right here in Brampton? No way, this can't be. And this group popped out of the blue, came out and was created within overnight which was the committee that was against nuclear activity in Brampton. And from that point on, there was nothing at all. And then they found out that I was the emergency manager, and their take on it was, well, how come you didn't know about this? You know, I'm not monitoring every, you know, we've got a population of 500,000. We identified 67 companies in Brampton that are actually using hazardous goods and that are manipulating hazardous goods. I'm not going to be taking care of it. But as a joke, what they suggested is that I should be buying a Geiger counter in order to be able to monitor all the activity that's going around. You know. So very limited focus, credibility, you know, doubtful sometimes. But you know, and then you've got the ones that are interest group that have a focus. You know, and we were talking about building codes and all that. But the business associations are going to say, I don't want the building code to change. You know, the developers. They don't want a building code because when you change a building code, that means the building is going to cost more, and it's going to be more difficult to sell houses, and it, you know, it has all sorts of impacts. So, yeah, I agree as an emergency manager, we need to do that. But not only you need to convince me, but you need to convince also the business association. You need to go back to that. There needs to be that connection. And last but not least of the groups is the people themselves. The people in the bottom line, and through those various organizations, various regroupment of people. One of the things we talk about is the perception or the expectation. We've been trying to give an emergency preparedness message for decades now. We've been trying to convince people that all they need to do is to have 72 hours worth of supplies to survive. That's all we've been, you know, in some places they're talking about weeks, and you know, and if you listen to, I don't know if anybody here is from the Mormon Church, but the Mormon Church says you got to have a year's supply, and here we're trying to convince people just to get 72 hours, and we've been doing it for decades. And you know what? We had the blackout in 2003. Although we had spent millions of dollars just prior to that for the Y2K to convince people that, you know what, we could have a blackout, so you better be ready. People did get ready. But the blackout didn't come on January 1. It came on August 14, 2003. No. And what happened? People had used the flashlights in their Walkman, and or the batteries for the flashlights in the Walkman and all that, and they didn't know where the flashlight was. All of the supplies that were prepared for the Y2K weren't there anymore, and people were just caught off guard. And it's just not ringing. People have this expectation, particularly in urban areas. In rural, they're a little better. They're a little more prepared because they don't have the same level of expectation. But in urban areas, they say, well, I don't need to prepare. If something happens, the city's going to take care of it. Government's going to be there. That's their job. That's why I pay taxes, isn't it? That's the expectation. And then, on top of that, you add that the people are being pulled. We did touch on that a little bit. Being pulled in various directions. I mean, right now, we're talking to them about terrorism. And some people are putting all the effort to really prepare, for terrorism and to raise the awareness. And I agree. And you know what? Yeah, it is a concern. We can't neglect it. It's there. There is that possibility. But what it does is it splits us up. And then the other big one right now is the pandemic. So you've got terrorism, which after the images of 9/11 that still keep popping up on their TV regularly, people have been really frightened by that one, and they can see it. Plus the bombings that happen here and there that just keep the fear going. That's a very real one. The other one is the pandemic. Well, this is scary, and then we hear about listeriosis, and we hear about all sorts of C. difficile and all of these other diseases on top of that. And people are saying, wow, this is scary stuff, And then you come and you talk to them about snowstorms. Snowstorms? Nothing to that. Who cares about snowstorms? Terrorism and panic, that's the real. So we're in competition here for the public's attention. And it's very difficult to get, constantly. We're being accused of fear-mongering very often. We're creating that. One of the things also, and I want to refer back to what Heather had been talking about, is having some of the tools that we need to be able to educate the public. We need to have it. Certainly, the hazards.ca website was very useful because suddenly we have a lot of realization that we need to know more about. We need to do. Every municipality in Ontario was mandated and had to do a hazards and risk assessment, and we had a very limited period of time to do it. So everybody started saying, well, how do we do it? Where do we go with it? And we started calling all over the place. And Environment Canada got a lot of calls that year because we all had to do it. And we all had to know what's the risk in my area. Now, I don't know it, so I have to go to the experts. And we were happy to see that a tool came out of that. Because now we can go back and I can review my high-rise, my hazard assessment on a regular basis based on things that exist. Another thing that we did, which we brought in the scientific community to work together, an example of multidisciplinary. I like the word multidisciplinary, and it's not just a meteorologist with a statistician, and it's a lot of diversity. We brought in for the study on heat alerts. We did a study 3 years ago on what was the real situation with heat alerts, because Toronto had gone through a few, but these communities surrounding Toronto had experienced similar, but not quite exactly the same. And we say, well, what's the exact data? And going back to this idea that we need to be able to monitor on a very local level is very important. And what the study revealed is that you've got Brampton to the north, and you've got Mississauga to the south, and you've got Toronto to the east of us. And looking at the data from all three communities, we found there was major differences. We looked at the mortality rate for the last 20 years, and we correlated that with all sorts of weather indicators, actually 20 different weather and meteorological indicators. We correlated that, and we came up with certain patterns, and we realized right away that when you have a heat alert in Toronto, doesn't mean that you have